Hey, Randy Hunter here from beginningsax.com and randyhunterjazz.vhx.tv. I hope you'll visit my website so you can learn about all of my jazz improv and beginning sax lessons. Got tons of lessons there. So, I think jazz articulation, the articulation we use is really as an important part of our sound and style as, the tone that we produce, the rhythm we play with, even the phrases that we play. Everything is really kind of intertwined. There's such an intrinsic relationship between tone, phrasing, style, sound, articulation. All of these things are really tied so well together. And the lick you just heard me play is using, I guess, my articulation with a lick from a Gene Ammons transcription on a Charlie Parker tune called Confirmation. Let me play it just a little slower for you. So you might hear the articulation a little more clearly there. Now I'll play it back up to tempo again. And, I can't even promise you that I did the articulation exactly the same at the different tempos because sometimes our tempo affects our articulation. Now, the articulation I'm using is in the realm of what I consider to be advanced jazz articulation. And I do have a lesson series called Advanced Jazz Articulation that gets a little bit more in depth into how this mechanism works. It involves more than just das and tas. A lot of times when we think about articulation at first, when we're playing jazz, we work with an upbeat articulation. This is largely just a ta or a da kind of articulation, working to keep the air moving over the tongue, which is where I always suggest folks start. We want to learn to And I do have a lesson series called Time Tongue Technique in my Stage 1 series that really goes through the basics of that upbeat articulation. So that's where you start. But eventually, you want to learn to use these other syllables when you articulate. Now, some folks talk about dodden articulation, dodden. I've also heard this articulation referred to sometimes as half-tonguing, which I can understand. And so really what we're working to do is develop a coordination between the tongue and some different syllables. And one of the aspects of the articulation is that we have da when our tongue comes away from the reed, when our tongue touches the reed. Dodden. Now, that's an easy way to put it, but it's really kind of a coordination thing that's a tricky sort of thing. Now, when I play this line, this lick from our transcription, I'm not going dodden on every single tongue, but dodden, that type of articulation plays a role in this. So there you hear the tongue going to the reed on the A flat. Dodden, da. So you hear several different things happening with the tongue. Dodden, so we start with dodden, da. Dodden, da. So the tongue goes to the reed as I go down the the C, G, and the F. The tongue is against the reed and against the lower lip, maybe just very slightly against the reed and slightly against the lower lip on the F. Then when I pull away to the E, we get the very pronounced da. So there, let me speed that up a little bit. So there you start to hear the articulation in motion. Now here's the thing, all of this has to happen kind of constantly, continuously, and fluidly in order for it to work, because if the tongue goes against the reed and stays there, it just deadens the reed. You don't get anything. So you have to have things constantly in motion for this articulation to work. A lot of times we talk about slowing things way down to practice, and a lot of things we do want to slow way down to practice. But if I slow this articulation way down, I'm not able to get it to work for me. So, that's why at different tempos, the articulation might have a different sound, so as well as the rhythm, things tend to swing a little bit more when you're going slower. But this articulation works very well in these bop styles that are moving a little faster. So, once again, up to the point where we're at on this lick. Now, I may have even done the articulation a little differently then. So I think that time I'm tonguing the F and a different da release on the E, but it's still based on the same premise of the dot and having the fluid motion of the articulation. Just keep in mind, it's not always going to be the same articulation that you play every time. It's really part of our style that we develop. So the articulation may be as as fluid or different as our language is at different times when we speak. Da. So there I'm tonguing the downbeats on the D and the F, and even the E. Da. So on these ascending lines, a lot of times the downbeats are tongued, and a lot of times the upbeats will be tongued on the descending lines. But again, there's no absolutes. There on the descending portion, E, C, A, G, F sharp, I tongued the upbeats. Dot. So I got a strong dot at the end. So the whole lick. Let me play it a little slower if I can keep everything working. It really comes a little more naturally when I play it a little more rapidly. And slower once again, so you hear it one more time. What a killer lick from Gene Ammons. Now, you'll also hear him later in the solo doing a repeated articulation, dot and dot dot and dot and dot, kind of like that on a single note on like a D. And a lot of times alternate fingerings will be mixed in with the repeated notes. But again, now, if you want to learn more about this articulation style, I've got a lesson series called Advanced Jazz Articulation. It's available at beginningsax.com, and on my subscription site, it's included at randyhunterjazz.vhx.tv. And I'll take you through a whole series of exercises that will help you learn to execute this type of articulation. And even in the final part of the series, I take several licks from some great players and show you how you can take and articulate those particular licks in manners that match the style of the original players, Dexter, Hank Mobley, Cannonball, and then how you can take those licks and start to make them your own with some various articulation options that you have available.